Okay, this morning I'll be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 25, starting with the first verse. And now Samuel had died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Maon. A certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name is Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent, beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. While David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men to him and said, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time, and when your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was taken. Ask your servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable toward my young men, since we come at a festive time, and please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them.'" Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the day. We thank you for your blessings. We thank you for the opportunity to study your word. Guide us in your son's name. Amen. Okay, last week we did a quick run through of several chapters, basically from the time that David fled from Saul. He took off, and as we looked at the fact that he fled from Gilboa, which is just outside of Jerusalem, just north of there. This map, I realize is a little difficult to see, but basically, I don't know why I did that. Okay. Basically, it was right in here. He fled to Nob, which is where the tabernacle was. And there he runs into Ahimelech, the priest at Nob, who gives him some food and Goliath's sword as a weapon. He then flees from there and goes over here to Gath, which is over here in this area. I don't see it right offhand, but anyway, it's over in that area. And the king of Gath, which is a Philistine, gets a little nervous, and so David pretends to go crazy, and then he flees from there and goes to the cave of Adullam, which is down in this area right in here. And so as he moves down to that area, we find that that's when his group of men start joining him, and he starts to begin with an army, if you want to call it that. It's really a bunch of warriors gathered together, and looks at him to be his leadership. He then goes and takes his parents across over here to Moab, puts them in safekeeping with the king of Moab in a fortress, and then he comes back and goes to this area over in here, the south of Jerusalem in Judah, which is where his family is from and everybody he knows. And he goes down to there. When Saul finds out, he comes and kills the priest, not just Ahimelech, but the entire clan, basically all those that served at the Lord there, with the exception of one. This one, Abiathar, goes to David's side and then begins to give him messages from the Lord as the in-between person there. David goes to a town called Keilah when he finds out that the Philistines are about to take it, which is over here. Remember, the Philistines controlled this plains area, and Israel controls the mountain area. And over in this area, Keilah is on the border there, and he goes and rescues it from the Philistines. And in doing so, Saul hears about it, so Saul starts to come after him and destroy the people for praising him and basically for all he has done. So David realizes that's going to be bad for them, so the Bible says that he flees, and he goes from there down into the desert of Ziph. The desert of Ziph is this area right here, it's this area right here, which includes several places that he will spend a lot of time. The desert of Maon, which is located there. Carmel is located there. Hebron is there. All this right in this area here. There's Carmel. There's Maon. So this is where we're talking about here, the desert of Ziph. And he goes down there, and he's going to spend most of his time working out of that area for a long period of time. So he goes down there, But the people of a town of Ziph, or the people of the area, are not real comfortable with him. You know, when we had a Revolutionary War, we had a group of people that were still favorable to to England. They were called Tories. And basically, that's what these were. They were still loyal to Israel and not willing to throw in with Judah. So they looked at him as a rebel that needed to be put out. So a lot of these people in this area still were not signed on with him, and they turned him in. They sent word up there and said, we'll give him to you. Come on down. We'll find him, and you can have him. So we find that David does come chasing. Saul comes after him, and when he does, the Philistines attack. He has to go back. David, in the meantime, flees and goes over to En-Gedi, over here on the Dead Sea. And we looked at that last week. And from there, Saul hears he's there, comes back after him again. And that's where David is in the cave and cuts the corner of his robe off and then says, why are you trying to kill me? If I could have already killed you. And Saul makes a pact then and says, okay, I understand. We'll go our separate ways. And Saul goes back, and they basically have a covenant of peace. And at that time, he acknowledges that David will, in fact, be king of Israel. Not happy about it, but he acknowledges that that's what's going to take place. All right, that brings us up to where we are today. Today, the first verse says that in chapter 25, now Samuel died. This is a turning point. As long as Samuel was alive, he had made Saul king, and Saul still looked to him whenever he needed guidance, even though Samuel was not given any guidance, because Samuel had already said, your time's up. But he still looked to them, and the people looked to Samuel to be the leader religiously. And now he was gone, and with him gone and out of the way, Saul feels like he's probably in a little bit different position now. He's in a position where he doesn't have that hanging over him. And we find that during this period of time, that David, let's go to my next group, that David, yes. All right. David leaves, is here in Carmel and Mahon, and we find that that's where he's residing. And so about this time, we find that he runs into, we encounter a guy named Nabal and a woman named Abigail. Now, what do we know about them? We kind of read a little bit about the introduction to them. What takes place here?
Nabal's a
rich man. Rich, surly, is the English I have, and mean in business, is the way the NIV writes it. He's not a very likable character, but he's rich. He's got lots of lots of goats and lots of sheep. And he has a place in Carmel. He's in, he's here in, where did I get that? Here's Maon. This is where they're at, the desert of Maon. Carmel's here. David basically lives in this area. And David has gone into business, kind of. He has got a group of 600 men or so. And what does he do with them? He's a protection detail. Yeah. You got the Amalekites down here. You got all these enemies attacking. You got the Philistines over here. He's already rescued from the Philistines one town. Raiders are coming from all over the place all the time, especially if you have something. They come to take it. Burn your camp, burn your village, take your animals, take your wives, take your kids, whatever they want, and take it. And it's a series of raiding adventures or excursions or whatever. And so all this goes on. So David is basically taking himself up and says, I'm going to be the protector in the area, my men. And so he protects this area. Why is that important to him becoming king?
Because as king, that's going to be one of his jobs.
That's his number one job, is to look out for his people. And guess how that influenced these people as a whole? In a positive way. So he's building up his rep as not just the general for the king, but he says, I got 600 men and we could take on anybody. And we'll protect you. We're looking out for you. So that's what he does. Well, he comes to this surly guy named whatever, and he needs some provisions.
So it's time to lean on him now.
It's time to lean on him. it's time to lean on him. But he didn't.
A lot of Chicago shows.
Well, but interestingly enough, he doesn't lean on him. He sends 10 young men to go be nice to him. Yes, exactly. Exactly. We're not going to break your legs today. We're going to tell you, be nice. And say, now, by the way, we have taken care of you. We protected you and everything. And how much does he ask for? Whatever he can give. I thought that was interesting. He didn't say, give me 10%. Didn't give me 1,000 sheep. Didn't give me this. Don't give me whatever you're comfortable with. That's why I said he wasn't leaning on him at that time. But what does this guy do?
He insults him.
And in that part of the world, it's bad to insult somebody, especially when they got 600 men. I don't know what in the world he was thinking. Yeah.
You and your mama, too.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing. He says, who is this David? Well, he knew who he was because the next question was, the son of Jesse. He knew who he was. He was from right over in here. He knew exactly who he was. He's the one that has killed 10,000s. He knew who David was. He was just being a jerk. And he was like, I'll just tell you, I don't care. And you don't mean anything to me. And so word goes back to David. David happy? No. What if David does nothing? No more money. He loses face in the neighborhood. And if you're going to be king and you're going to rule and these people are going to follow you, they need to understand that when you talk, you mean business. Remember, Samuel said your kings are going to take what from you? Anything they want, and meaning everything. And so here's kind of a clue is, wait a minute, I can't let this go, aside from the fact that he didn't want to let it go. And so he marches and he's getting ready to head to Carmel, but in the meantime, the shepherds, servants of this guy, Nabal, go and run and tell his wife, Abigail, you know what your husband has done? He's about to get us all killed. You ain't going to have a place to live. You're not going to have any wealth you're not going to have anything. We will be exterminated. This is David. I know who David is, the son of Jesse, the one that's killed the 10,000s. He's coming.
We've heard his song on the radio.
We've heard his song on the radio. He's on his way here to annihilate us.
And they reminded her that when he was protecting them, they never took anything.
He never did anything. If anything, he was their protector. So what in the world? And so she gathers up a bunch of provisions, and it lists all the provisions. And she put out a bunch. And then she proceeds to have that servant lead her to meet him on the way. On the way, she meets David, and she begs him. She basically recognizes who he is, apologizes for her husband. Wives, don't jump up and say how many times you've done that. Apologizes for her husband and his rashness. And turns right around and then says, here, take all this, please forgive us, basically, and puts herself out there for David and says, don't make it a stain on your reputation that you had to do this, even though David was going to have to, or his reputation, whatever. So this was a way of allowing him to save face and get exactly what he accomplished, which is the respect and reputation that he needed. And at the same time, he was able to diffuse the situation. She was able to do that and do those kind of things. So here we do. She does that.
I suspect she had some years of doing that, had practice in doing that.
Trying to smooth things over? Yes, probably.
I mean, his name was Fool.
Yes. As a matter of fact, she points that out to David. She says, my husband, the fool, literally, that's his name, was being foolish. He was living up to his name, and so she pretty much lays it out there. Good point.
I just want to know if she was in subjection.
In subjection? Yeah. She was in subjection, but she went around to accomplish some things she needed to. I mean, she went back to him and went back home and everything else. And then when he found out, what happened to him? had a stroke, had a heart attack. It says his heart failed or began faltering, I guess is the word. So it took him 10 days, but I would suspect it was a heart attack. Like, oh my goodness, what have I done? And 10 days later, he died. After he dies, David says, oh, I hear about that. So he goes over to Carmel, and what do you think he does? He says, not only do I get his stuff, I invited his wife to be his wife. Okay? Now this would make David's third wife. All right? His first wife was who? Micah, which is the second daughter of Saul. She's no longer with him at this time because she betrayed Saul by letting David sneak out, and she hid the idol in the bed to make him think he was there when he really wasn't. So Saul wasn't happy with her. Matter of fact, the Bible goes on to tell us that he gave her to another person to be their wife. What? Yeah.
He did the first one.
That's the first wife, Micah. That's what I'm talking about. David, no, he gave the first one that he promised in the battle, but no, he physically took David's wife and gave her to another man to be his wife. Because next week or the week after, we're going to find where David gets her back. Anyway, so his first wife, Micah, is no longer with him at this time because Saul was giving her away to somebody else after he had married her. All right?
How does that happen? I mean,
He's the king.
I know, but still.
But you gotta remember that this is a totally different society where men rule.
Sure.
It's more like property.
Women were possession.
But still, it was not, go back to Exodus and Leviticus, that was not what God said to do. That was against everything he said. But is Saul following what God says to do? No. Okay, so that kind of takes care of that. All right, so here he is. This is his third wife because he's actually married another one from up here, actually farther up in here, up in the valley is Jezreel, in a town from up there. Not real sure how he came in contact with her. It doesn't really say, but he has another wife, and so she becomes his third wife there. So this takes place, and we find that at the end of chapter 25, he becomes his third wife. Going to chapter 26, we find that the Ziphites, these group of folks that are not real comfortable with David being their leader, go tell David, he's down here amongst us. And by the way, if you come down, he's at this particular hill. If you will come here, we will show you right where he's at. So they're still trying to get him out of there. They're very loyal to Saul.
They're Benjamites instead of from Judah, aren't they?
No, they're Ziphites. They're way down here. They're actually in this area right here. Benjamin is up here. Now, if they're Benjamites, they're way relocated out of their territory. But that doesn't mean they still don't have leanings. Just like in any revolutionary war or civil war or whatever, you still have people that are still connected to the party in power, so to speak. And this group of folks were. And they probably saw him as a source of trouble that was going to get them killed. Because that's when they first jumped into action and said, here, come get him. As they don't want him, Saul was promised to come destroy this town he had just liberated. And they didn't want him coming down there and taking them out. You know, most of the time we find that taking place among people that behave this way are more concerned about their own situation and what's going to happen to them rather than a particular ideology or something. Anyway, that's the situation. Don't know. But basically they turn him in again, and we find then in chapter 26 that the Ziphites tell him, and he comes down here into this area, right in here, and let's see, I think that's the one I had the map. Yeah. All right, he comes back down in here. Here's Ziph, south of Hebron, in this area right here. And there's a hill, and that hill is called Hill of Heculum, I guess. And we find that Saul takes 3,000 men and goes out to kill him. David hears about it, and this hill, David goes around the other side, and they kind of keep moving around trying to stay away from each other. And then David sees them resting in camp, and the Bible says he sneaks in, and this time what does he do? Takes his spear and his water jug, and he walks out with those, and then he comes back and onto the hill and starts hollering across at him to Abner. I would say, who is Saul's general, and says, what kind of general are you? What kind of protector are you? I just came into your camp, and I got your king's spear, his fighting implement, and his water, his refreshing implement, straight from in his camp, from next to his bed. What kind of person are you? Whoa, you're talking about embarrassing. And then David says to the king, says, why are you still after me? I've told you before, I'm not out to kill you. I could have done it again. Right here. Didn't do it. And we find that Saul sees that and goes back home when he sees that David had spared him. Was he done chasing him or removing him? No. He just couldn't do it right then. First of all, he knew that he was in a bad position. If David could sneak in and get him, it's probably a good time to leave with your tail between your legs while you still can, because you don't know what that means. So we find that he goes back up to his place, and David realizes in chapter 27, chapter 27, yes, chapter 27, it says that he is not comfortable in Ziph, the desert of Ziph, because they keep trying to turn him in. And he knows Saul's going to keep coming after him, so he decides to make another strategic move. What is that? He goes to the Philistines. The Bible says he goes to Gath. This is where he already tried to go when he first fled, and he had to pretend to be crazy to keep the king from killing him. But now he's got a raiding party of 600 men. He goes to Gath and says, your enemy is my enemy. Saul's your enemy, he's my enemy. He's trying to kill me. And, of course, word all around of the division there was pretty strong. So he becomes okay with the Philistines. They're happy with him because they look at him and say, aha, we're getting part of these people here are pulling away from him. So that they look at that as a way to move Israel closer and closer to what they want. And so David says, give me a village. Give me a place where I can go reside. He says, okay, I'm going to give you a place called Ziklag. All right, nobody knows where that is. There's been a dozen different places. Most likely, we know it's between here and here. Most likely, it's right here. This is the most common thought, but some would say here. Archaeology is all over the place because they argue about different centuries and this and that, and it gets confusing. But that just means they haven't found something. So you're not really sure. Anyway, it's probably one of these two places. We do know it's way down in the south part of the Philistine territory. Remember, they run the plains. Over here in the hill country is Israel. So he's down the south side. Now, he puts him down there, away from him, down here close to his roots, and he gives him a job. What's a job? Protect him down there. As a matter of fact, this is probably one of the territories where the easiest routes north and south to come up and attack the Philistines from south, from Egypt and all those places, and all these raiders. Here's the raiders, the Amalekites, the Jerahmeelites, and the Kenites. These folks would come up here and raid all the time. So he's saying, here, you go down there and keep those raiders away. And so he sends him down there to Ziklag in order to do that. Now, while he's there, the Bible says in chapter 27, verse 8, and David and his men went up and raided these three groups, the Gershurites, the Gizurites, and the Amalekites, which are all in this area right here. Okay? And from ancient times, these people lived in a land extending from Shur, which is down in here, all the way over to Egypt, over here. So this whole area, they lived in that area, which we would call north of the Sinai Peninsula today, basically. All right, so here they are. They live here, and whenever David attacked an area, he did not leave a man or woman alive, but took their sheep, cattle, donkeys, camels, and clothes and returned then he returned them to Achish, to the king up here. He would give him rewards or whatever from his thing. Now, the king said, "Where'd you go raiding today?" And David would say, "Where?" "The Negev of Judah," which is the desert of Judah. Against the Negev of Jeremiah, or the Kenites. And he did this, but he was basically trying to let the Philistine king know that he was fighting against these folks here, but he wasn't letting him know that he was not attacking his people of Judah. That's why he calls it the Negev of Judah, because he thought he was attacking all these folks here, but he wouldn't tell him that he wasn't doing it to his own people. And so the king thought, I can trust him. He's out there wiping out his own people in the past. Okay? All right. That brings us up to chapter 28. In chapter 28, we find that a battle is brewing. In this battle, all right, up in the Jezreel Valley. And whatever we don't finish today, we're going to bridge over into next week as we move into him becoming king. But so he moves over into the Jezreel Valley, and over here we find that the Philistines are about to start a war, or about to take Saul to task. This is the Jezreel Valley. It begins up here at Mount Carmel, goes right down through here all the way to the Jordan River. Okay? There are several places in there that you're probably familiar with. Later on, we'll find that Nazareth is right here. Some other places or whatever. All right, so he goes there, and all right. So Saul goes and he sets up camp at a place called Mount Gilboa. This is what it looks like. It's basically on the Jordan River at the mouth of the Jezreel Valley. It's basically right here. See, that's Beth Shan. This is Mount Gilboa right here. Okay? As a matter of fact, let's do it that way. All right, Mount Gilboa. So here he is right here on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines go to a place called Shunem. They set up their camp here. We find that over here is where the Israelite camp is, and they're preparing for a battle. This is going to be Saul's last battle. As he goes there, Saul is very, very worried and concerned, and he wants to talk to Samuel. But what is it we find out? Samuel is what? Dead. Even if he wanted to go talk to him, he couldn't. So he does something, even though he had already previously put a law out that you can't have mediums in the country. We find that he goes to Endor right up here, and he approaches a medium there to bring Samuel back from the dead. In this chapter, we find that he brings Samuel back, and Samuel comes back and tells him, "Why are you calling me? I've already told you that you're going to the kingdom is going to be lost. You're going to die. It's going to go over to David. I've already told you all this because of what you didn't do with the Amalekites years ago. Why did you bring me up?" And he says, "I want to know what's going to happen." And he said, "What's going to happen? Tomorrow you're going to lose a battle. You're going to die and all your sons. That's what's going to happen." And so we find that Saul is terrified. He's already terrified because he's up here on this mountain range looking down at the Philistine army in the valley and knows it's about to get ugly. And so he comes back from there, and we comes back to Mount Gilboa, and we find then that the Philistines move from here down to Jezreel, and then apparently they come on up the mountain range and they attack, and the battle rages on Mount Gilboa. And during that battle, Saul is killed. They don't know they've killed him until the next day. Saul is killed, but not by their hand, but he was wounded. He killed himself. He realized he's about to die, and he tried to get his armor bearer to kill him so that he wouldn't be taken captive as a king, which is not a good thing. So he falls on his own sword, and he dies right there. When he dies, the Philistines cut his head off, and they nail his body to a wall in Beth Shan, which is in the Jordan River Valley at the foot of Mount Gilboa. And which is where that picture was taken from. That was taken looking up from the road down here that runs along the Jordan River, up there. So at Beth Shan, we find that takes place. And across over here is Jabesh Gilead, and those people come, take his body down, and bury him. And go from there. Let's see. All right. So this becomes the last battle of Saul, and it ends right there. All right, covered a lot of territory. That pretty much covers to the end of 1 Samuel, except for one event that while this is taking place, and we'll talk about it next week, David's down here at Ziklag, and some things are happening down there at the same time, and we'll take a look at it next week when we do that. Any questions or anything about what's going on here? All right, what I wanted to point out is brings us up to a point where David's no longer running for himself. He has stepped away. We find that this battle, he was supposed to be part of the rear guard of this battle for the Philistine rear guard, which means the Philistines could have been caught between David's army and Saul's army. That's why his generals didn't trust David and wanted him sent away and sent him back to Ziklag. Okay, David was going up there with him. He says, I'm with you. Now, we don't know how he was going to fight or what was going to happen, but the generals for the Philistines weren't comfortable with him, so they sent him away. So he goes back down here to Ziklag, way down here. And he's down there while this is taking place. This last battle of Saul is the end of Saul's kingdom. Now, there's going to be some power struggles as they try to replace him, and who is going to be king, and we'll look at that a little bit next week. But it's basically the end of that kingdom. All right. We started off by saying
that I always looked at was that Jonathan gets killed.
Jonathan, which is the heir to the throne, but
Well, it's not like that. I mean, he's David's friend.
yeah,
And, that was that bond, and that's what really tears David up is when he finds out that Jonathan died.
he does. And we will talk about that next week. So that is true. But the real significance of this is it's the end of the kingdom of Saul. And Saul was the king after man's own heart. It's the ending of that king that they wanted and the replacing with a kingdom, which we'll start next week, a king that is after God's own heart. And so it's a changing, a significance, and it's the ending of one and the changing of one, where God is moving from, this is what you wanted, now here's what I want. And so this is the end of that. One of the things I try to do is talk about the parallels with Christ. One of the things related to that is a couple things, and I'm going to touch them very briefly. In Revelation chapter 16, it talks about the Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon is the battle of the hill at Megiddo. Here's Megiddo. It is a representation, because this is all pictorial language, of that final battle between the kings of men and God. Basically, it's the end of this world that's being ruled by the kings of this world, and when God takes on. It's the seventh bowl is open. It's the final battle. That's what it represents in Revelation. Whether you look at it in a first century application, a future century application, or whatever. Of course, we know people today take that into a physical scenario, the physical battle of Armageddon, even though that's not what he's talking about. It's everything spiritual in that book. This is the place they go back to. Why? Because the valley of Jezreel has very significant events take place. This was the end of man's king and the beginning of God's king.
This was also a historic battlefield throughout time before this and after this.
Absolutely.
It is from the people of the north and the people of the south coming together. This is the first flat land you run into a meeting place and where they can use chariots and things like that.
Absolutely.
So it has been a
There is all kinds of battles that took place there.
blood forever.
Yes. And that is one of the reasons in Revelation the significance is it's the transition from the kings of this world, the kings of God. In David's time, it's the transition from the king that is ruled by that is after David, man's heart, to the one of God's heart. In addition to that, this is the same place that Josiah was killed in a battle where the Egyptians came up. This is right here, the road from Egypt right here came up here, and Josiah was killed, and Egypt took over Israel. No longer would Israel be a nation. When Josiah was killed, that ended that. They had his sons and nephew and different people kind of had some power struggles, but they were ruled by either the Egyptians or the Babylonians. Josiah was the last king of physical Israel. The next king that would rule Israel would be the king of the spiritual Israel, which would be David. This is a very significant place in history for this transition between the parts of this world versus what God was going toward after that. And so there's different representations. And that's a place that's just interesting that all just happen to be there. God kind of does that, I've found. All right. Next week, we're going to drop back and take a look at David's events in Ziklag, but we're really, in the book, we'll move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 9, and we're going to take a look at David becoming king and how all that transition and how that transpires. There's Ziklag.